Most people walk through life unaware of a hidden curve. It isn't marked on any map taught in classrooms, written on calendars, or whispered in family advice. Yet one day it arrives without warning, and everything begins to shift. This curve usually appears around the age of 60. From the outside, it may look like nothing has truly changed. The body moves with less speed. The days unfold with greater simplicity. Feelings seem steadier, calmer. But inside, a quiet turning point stirs. The soul alters its direction. It is not a sudden break or dramatic transformation. It feels more like something within slowly stops chasing the same ambitions. The desire to win approval fades. The urge to prove one's worth dissolves. Even long-cherished goals lose urgency. The soul begins to move backwards, not as retreat, but as a symbolic return, as if searching for something abandoned long ago amid the rubble of hurried years, buried inside unspoken sacrifices, hidden in the empty rooms we never dared to enter. Carl Jung explained that the first half of life is spent constructing the ego, while the second is devoted to returning to the soul. That return is rarely easy. It stings because by 60 the soul refuses masks. It rejects pretenses. It pushes aside whatever feels forced. It insists on truth. And truth often requires admitting that much of what we lived was only survival. At this stage, many sense an unusual distance, as if the life once believed meaningful now resembles a staged play. Outwardly stable, inwardly they carry a deep fatigue, not of the body but of existence itself. It is not depression, it is clarity. The soul whispers, turn around, stop searching outside for what can only be uncovered within. In this phase, people begin revisiting their story, their marriages, children, careers, choices, scars of the past. Everything resurfaces, not to injure, but to be understood and absorbed. At 60, the soul longs for completeness. It no longer yearns for new honours, new possessions, or a new body. It craves silence, serenity, and the assurance that beauty endures, that meaning still lives, that something essential still waits to be discovered. It becomes a season of symbolic cleansing, a time to open hidden drawers, cast away inherited fears, forgive those who never knew how to love rightly, and release the weight of always appearing strong. It is the moment to face the mirror with no mask, no disguise, no lies. Those who pass through this threshold with courage find something rare. The soul never grows old. It returns to its purest form. And what once looked like an ending reveals itself as the dawn of another way of living. Lighter, more authentic, more profound. That is the unspoken secret, the curve few acknowledge. For those who listen closely to their soul, it becomes the path that leads home. Some call it maturity, others name it aging. But it is something beyond words. At 60, the body may slow, yet within the soul something accelerates, as though all that was postponed now demands its place, as though unfinished business leans forward and whispers, "The time is now." The remarkable thing about this transformation is that it doesn't show on the outside. It happens in the invisible, where one morning, without warning, you feel different. Clothes that once defined you suddenly feel pointless. Conversations that used to excite you now seem flat. Achievements you once cherished feel heavy, almost like chains. In that silence, the soul begins to raise questions. What truly moves me now? What part of me has survived untouched by the expectations of others? What would I choose if no one had to be pleased anymore? Such questions don't appear randomly. They sprout like seeds of a new cycle waiting to grow. At 60, time is no longer counted in numbers but in depth. Urgency no longer comes from external demands but from the soul itself. Jung believed that after years spent adapting and conquering, the psyche longs for reintegration. That moment only comes when there is space to face what was ignored. The shadow, as Jung called it, steps forward asking to be seen. Yet the shadow is not evil. It is simply what was left behind. The wounded child, the dreams shelved away, the intuition silenced. At 60, all these elements rise again, not as burdens, but as possibilities. It is common to feel a sudden impulse to redirect life, to study again, to cut away toxic bonds, to begin in places once thought too late. Because the soul never follows the clock's ticking, it responds only to its inner call. And when the soul recognizes that after all battles there is still life, It tries once more. It seeks to live what remains without disguise. This is why so many women discover their strength during this season. They stop apologizing, they stop dimming their light, they no longer seek permission just to exist. The beauty that blooms at 60 has nothing to do with youth or outward form. It is freedom, truth, and wholeness. It unsettles those who remain shallow because it feels too authentic, too silent, too undeniable. And those who embody it no longer feel any need to prove themselves. Perhaps you felt this shift too, that old roles no longer fit, that you yearn for depth, that you want to care only about what truly matters, the urge to say no without guilt, to say yes with honesty. This impulse isn't selfish, it is an awakening, the dawn of another chapter. Here, you stop living for others and begin living from yourself. Those who cross this threshold discover a rare peace, the calm of simply being, unafraid, as the soul breathes again in its natural rhythm. There is also a truth many never say aloud, though they feel it clearly at this stage, the realization of having spent decades living for others, children, partners, families, careers, endless duties. All of it filled so much space that now there is a strange emptiness, a vacant room, and it is there that the soul begins to move. It doesn't want to be useful anymore, it wants to be real. In a culture obsessed with productivity, this may sound strange, yet the soul is not here to produce, it is here to be whole. At 60 it whispers firmly, "I have obeyed every command, now it is my turn." This reversal of values can feel terrifying because no one warns you about it. Culture presents aging as decline, but Jung understood it differently. For him, this stage was the richest, the most symbolic, overflowing with possibility. The ego loosens, pride dissolves, and time begins to reveal what was buried all along. Old memories often surge with unexpected force, moments from childhood, people once dear, places heavy with longing. Yet this is not mere nostalgia. It is the soul carefully reorganizing its archives, trying to discover what still wounds, what remains unanswered, what continues to breathe within. And for that to happen, silence is required. The soul does not shout here, it exhales quietly. It whispers between ordinary days, in recurring dreams, in sudden waves of emotion, in desires you cannot explain. You notice that some people no longer belong in your life, that certain opinions no longer move you, that long-standing injuries no longer shape your identity. It is as if the soul declares its independence, saying clearly, "I am in charge now." But to follow, you must listen. Listen to sadness that has no cause, to the body pleading for more rest, to the boredom that replaces excitement. Each sign points to one reality, a profound transformation underway. And this transformation isn't surface level, it is structural. It dismantles illusions, dissolves roles, and forces you to face something avoided for years, your own truth. At this threshold, many finally encounter spirituality, not as belief or ritual, but as lived presence, as raw awareness. Jung once observed that enlightenment does not come from imagining figures of light, but from confronting one's own darkness. By 60, these words weigh heavier than ever. Darkness is not the enemy, it is the threshold, the womb of renewal. What once appeared as loneliness now reveals itself as a meeting, with what is essential, with what has always quietly waited to be held. Even words transform. Time no longer equals speed, it becomes presence. You stop measuring your days by accomplishments and begin to feel them through depth. Love also alters at this stage. It ceases to be fantasy or expectation. It becomes a conscious act. Love is no longer about completing someone, it is about accompanying. Love turns into silence shared, a glance that understands, a presence that honors space. Meanwhile, fear loosens its grip. You have lived through too much to tremble at small things. You have fallen and risen countless times, and fear becomes only proof of your resilience. At 60, wisdom emerges that does not come from study but from scars. It lives in the eyes, speaks through silence, moves without effort. And this wisdom unsettles those who remain stuck in the theatre of ego, those who mistake worth for appearance, youth for strength. They do not see that a seasoned soul is fertile ground for creation. At this stage, the most beautiful things begin to bloom, the deepest stories, the most honest counsel, the pauses that heal. Yet only what dares to die can return alive. At 60, many illusions must die. The hunger for approval, the fantasy of control, the pressure to be flawless. And when they do, something extraordinary takes place. You breathe differently. After decades of constriction, the soul throws open a window. From that opening, the world feels more alive, more tender, more true. This is why so many feel a strong impulse to create, to paint, to write, to travel, not to collect places but to encounter themselves in them. The soul longs for freedom, for expression, to be visible not for others, but for itself. Each step becomes a healing, not from medicine, but from reconciliation with time itself. You no longer wish to rush into the future or retreat into the past. You simply desire to be here, fully present. There is a secret season inside the human soul, and it only begins to bloom after 60. It does not resemble the reckless spring of youth, overflowing with urgency and promises. It is slower, steadier, rooted in storms already endured. It blossoms with honesty. It asks little of the body but much of the spirit. This is the season of reconciliation with your own history, not with blame or regret, but with compassion. You stop scolding yourself for what went wrong. You embrace the person you once were, with tenderness, recognizing that every version of you was doing the best it could with what it had. This understanding liberates, because only those who forgive themselves can finally move lightly. And lightness becomes essential at 60, not a shallow lightness that denies pain, but a conscious one that admits hurt while refusing to let it rule. Jung named this stage late individuation, the moment when the soul, after years of shaping itself to fit the world, finally declares, "Now I want to discover myself." That discovery is subtle, profound, and real. It demands no spotlight, no applause. It appears in small gestures, a book that suddenly brings tears, a sunset that feels strangely new, a melody that awakens forgotten memories. The soul grows tender to simple things, not because it is fragile, but because it has dropped its armor, no longer afraid to feel. This sensitivity is not weakness but refined strength, born from everything survived and transformed. At 60, the need to persuade others vanishes. You simply live with authenticity and presence, and this presence touches those around you, children, grandchildren, friends, even strangers. When the soul regains its wholeness, it radiates light into every corner. There emerges a beauty that appears only when the rush has ended. It shows itself in pauses, in the lines carved on the face, in eyes that have witnessed much and can still be moved. This beauty does not shout. It quietly shines, and often those who possess it are unaware, because they spent a lifetime trying to meet standards that never recognized their glow. But at 60, that beauty comes forth. It blossoms when you stop fighting the clock, when you stop chasing reflections in others' mirrors, when you see that your story, with all its pain and choices, is worthy of celebration. This beauty is seen in the woman who walks alone yet never feels lonely, in the man who cries without shame, in the voice that stays silent without betraying itself. The soul begins speaking its own language, presence. Relationships shift. You leave behind what depletes you and draw close to what sustains you. And in solitude, you learn to enjoy your own company. That is freedom. When being alone is not absence, but presence. When silence no longer unsettles but becomes refuge. When time ceases to be a number and turns into space. At 60, you understand you no longer need to justify yourself. You simply exist. Those who truly see you will remain. Those who don't will leave. But it no longer hurts, because you know that only another awakened soul can recognize your own. And when the soul alters its course, everything hidden rises to the surface, sometimes gently, sometimes with force. Always with an invitation. Become who you are at last, without fear. That requires letting go of the old masks, of the need for admiration, of the stories others wrote about you. At 60, what matters is not the act itself, but the intention behind it, the soul breathing through every word. You begin to realize that the greatest lessons of your life were never born from pain itself, but from how you navigated through it, from the boundaries you finally set, from the silences you endured, from the dignity with which you carried hidden battles. This invisible repertoire never appears on diplomas, never receives applause, but it shows in the way you rise each morning, in the tenderness of your love, in the quiet forgiveness you offer without drama. As the soul ripens, it learns to trust its own compass. It perceives signs it once ignored. It respects its inner rhythms. It knows when words are needed and when silence must prevail, even if lips tremble. That is not weakness. It is wisdom, refined by time. Jung explained that the second half of life is not a quest for conquest, but for integration. The forgotten feminine, the silenced masculine, the wounded child, the wise elder, all return, face one another, and recognize themselves. From that reunion, a new strength is born, not the strength that overpowers, but the one that sustains, protects, and radiates quietly from within. There comes a moment when everything feels aligned, not because the world has shifted, but because you have found peace. At 60, the soul no longer chases speed. It craves depth. It no longer strives to conquer the world. It seeks rest within its own being. Many discover that life was never about possession, but about presence, about being true even if no one understands, about remaining whole even if shattered repeatedly. By 60, illusions have been tested, losses absorbed, shortcuts exposed, yet something inside still breathes, still dreams, still insists on living, not out of obligation, but out of joy. Jung considered this sacred, the moment when the ego bows before the soul, when the external world fades and the inner world becomes a temple. When you finally walk without the weight of the world crushing your shoulders, when you at last permit yourself to rest in yourself, and in that stillness, the real meaning of life begins to unfold. Not the one society told you, but the one you unearthed through your own journey. If these words resonate, perhaps you've felt parts of yourself awakening. And if you sense this curve calling, share it. Because every silence deserves a voice, and every soul deserves space to bloom. Before we part, I want to offer you a pause, a moment that isn't filled with more words but with space. Because sometimes reflection doesn't begin while we're listening. It begins in the quiet that follows. Stay here a little longer. Let the images move slowly across the screen. Let the music breathe around you. Allow your thoughts to wander without forcing them. Maybe a sentence from this video lingers with you. Maybe a memory returns. Maybe nothing comes at all. All of it is part of the journey. So remain present. Breathe deeply. Give yourself the gift of silence. And let what you've just heard find its place within your own story. Stay with us in this stillness and allow the soul to speak in its own rhythm.